Mr. Speaker, my esteemed colleagues, last Monday, July 24, before this August hall, the Chief Executive told the 19th Congress, the entire Filipino nation, that in his own words, I quote, "The state of the nation is sound and is improving. Dumating na po ang bagong Pilipinas." He stressed, nagsisimula pa lamang tayo, ang pagbangon ng ating bayan ay magpapatuloy pa. End of quote. Mr. Speaker, my esteemed colleagues, hear me for this thing called contrasona. It is not just traditional, it is not just normal. Contrasona is truly vital. It is an offshoot of public accountability, of accountable government, which is one of the defining principles of democracy. As Dwi Vidi declared, I quote, "Accountability is the foundation of any governing process, and the effectiveness of that process depends upon how those in authority account for the manner in which they have fulfilled their responsibilities, both constitutional and legal." End of quote. Inevitably, this House of the People will be made to account for the mandate and empowerment of the sovereign people. The sovereign people had reposed on its members. Mr. Speaker, let me say this again. We in the minority were representatives of the people first before we aligned ourselves with the smaller bloc of this chamber. We remain as members of the House, and we shall continue to pursue that empowerment. We commit ourselves to be bound by the demands of that public accountability. And so, today, the minority is impelled to raise this paradigmatic query. What is the state of the nation? After 1 year of President Bongbong Marcos' stewardship, how was it for this country of 114 million people? Marc Levy, a French novelist, is instructive, and he said, I quote, "To realize the value of 1 year, ask a student who failed or passed a course." End of quote. This brings back memories of my elementary years in Eastern Samar. Back then, every periodical examinations, my parents were expecting my school card, the same way they expected those of my siblings. Our parents wanted always to know whether we did good in school or not. This had been the consistent practice for years. We periodically reported to the masters of the house, our parents. So, let it be in this people's house, for this house can never be and should never be any different. Its members should be held accountable for their sovereign masters. They should report their accomplishments to the very source of their mandates, their respective constituencies. Mr. Speaker, here's our assessment of the true state of the nation, where the government did well and where it failed. The minority also asked how the government intends to cascade the growth to benefit the many who are poor, the 4 Ps, the other beneficiaries in the urban areas and in the countryside. We'd like to ask the Executive Department how it plans to pursue inclusivity in growth if we are to share a common future or a shared destiny. After all, my dear colleagues, history reminds us that, however fleetingly, the developmental destiny of this nation is in its government's hands. Here we go, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we share in the optimism of the President. We share in the growth assessment by the Executive. But because of the shared optimism, we wanted to know, ramdam kaya sa ibaba? How will the Executive Department cascade this reported growth in the macro level down to the ground level realities? How can the poorest of the poor, the unschooled, the families of our migrant workers, solo parents, and the rest share in the benefits of Bagong Pilipinas? Yes, we totally agree that the President, that a strong, I quote, that a strong and stable rule of law will strengthen the foundation of our transformation. End of quote. But precisely because of this agreement that the minority would like to ask, how can the government morally champion the rule of law when it has been violating some of its own laws? For instance, the Right of Way Act, a newly amended law, has been violated by our budget authorities and by our infrastructure departments when the government had illegally taken private properties without paying just compensations. The regional center of Bicol region is a case in point, Mr. Speaker. It is nestled on a private property where office buildings were constructed by the government without compensating the private landowners, and it remained as such for years. At times, the utter lack of budgetary allocations for the acquisition of the rights-of-way has stymied the implementation of various infrastructure programs of the government. As a result, developmental timelines of these projects have been drastically altered or impaired, affecting in the process the economic goals of the projects. This must be given priority by this administration if we are to meaningfully march forward. Yes, we agree with the President's aggressiveness in the country's investment and business promotions by going beyond our borders for partnership and international agreements. But the minority would like to ask if the countryside can never benefit from the fruits of these international pursuits. How can inclusivity be achieved without a clear and workable balance between the allure of the metropolis and the pressing demands of the countryside? Yes, we agree with the President's optimism to finally put an end to smuggling, hoarding, and corruption in government. But precisely because of the shared optimism that the minority asks, how can smuggling be abated when it is abated by the Bureau itself? Look at the Customs Modernization and Tariff Act. It is a relatively new law. Yet, since its effectivity in 2016, the Bureau of Customs has been violating its own provisions with impunity. Misinvoicing, misdeclaration, and other falsities in declaration have been going on right at the very nose of our customs authorities. All this because goods declarations were allowed even without the benefit of an oath, a clear violation of sections 412 and 413 of that law. which requires declarations to be executed under penalties of falsification or perjury. As a result, the express requirement that the description of goods must be sufficient and is specified in detail to enable the goods to be identified for customs valuation, statistical purposes, and qualification of the appropriate tariff heading and subheading in the currency of the invoice and in such other particulars necessary for the proper assessment and collection of duties and taxes. It is taken advantage of by the smugglers in cahoots with the corrupt in the agency. Mr. Speaker, it is not the Anti-Agricultural Smuggling Act that is deficient. It is the customs authorities' negligence and cavalierism with the smugglers that is causing havoc. The chief executive needs to throw the books at these people. The war against smuggling was, after all, one of his directives during his first SONA. Yes, we agree with the President that we need to amend the very old law, the Philippine Immigration Act of 1940, so old that it even predates the independence of this republic. The obsolescence of this law is impacting negatively on the government's desire to draw more tourists into the country. It limits the response capacity of our border control and immigration authorities. We thank the President for endorsing the measure which this humble representation principally authored first in the 12th Congress until now, that was acted with dispatch by the House of Representatives. Mr. Speaker, we thank the President for appointing Secretary Gilberto Teodoro to the Department of National Defense, whose intelligence, experience, and gravitas cohere with the need for the adoption of a calibrated external defense posturing running in tandem with the administration's independent foreign policy built on the mantra of friend to all, enemy to none. Indeed, Secretary Teodoro is an excellent choice for the D&D post. But why can't this administration find the same intelligence, the same gravitas for the full-time stewardship of the Agriculture Department? The President's mind needs to be freed from the nitty-gritty of a department-level affair. The whole bureaucracy, nay, the whole country, needs his undivided attention at the helm of the ship of the state. The chief executive should leave the agriculture portfolio to someone in his bosom confidence. While food security is a pressing concern, it is, however, subsumed in the far larger concern of national security. The former can be delegated to a subaltern, but the grander national security should be handled by no less than the chief executive himself. Finally, Mr. Speaker, my esteemed colleagues, let me end this traditional contrasona with a story adapted from the internet, so relevant in our time, so timely for today, and so important in our role as representatives of the people. A college professor was giving his periodical exams. He distributed to his students what purported to be his examination questioners. Then he motioned everyone to proceed answering. But when his students checked on the examination sheets, they were all perplexed to see nothing on the examination sheet. Yes, nothing but a small dot. So they were all astonished, completely baffled by the exercise, until the professor said, "Class, write a paragraph or two on whatever you see on your examination sheets, anything. But your time is up to 30 minutes, and it starts now." So despite bewilderment, the students proceeded to collect their thoughts and write something as directed. And when the 30-minute period was up, the professor collected all the examination sheets. After reading each and every answer sheet, the professor noticed that all as in everyone, wrote everything about the dot. Its size, its shape, its color, even the impression of it, and where the dot was situated in the paper. They expounded on it extensively, Mr. Speaker. Yes, all about the small dot. There was nothing written about the wide, white blank space of their test papers. Nothing. End of the story. My esteemed colleagues, that class represents the microcosm of our society today, both in unity and diversity. Everyone can write a book about the dot or comment on everything they want to say something on, and they can be passionate on what they believe, things that matter. Never mind if it's just a small dot, as distinguished from the wide, bright realities of the world where opportunities abound. They determine their focus, their convictions, and everything can be centered on the dot of their limitations. Mr. Speaker, we in the minority will not just look at the small dot of our prejudices and limitations, but will continue to explore, to suggest, to articulate, and propose measures that cover the wide areas where opportunities for good and effective governance abound. Right at the get-go, we boarded the same vessel, cruised at the same speed, watched the same horizon, and observed the same dynamics of the ocean as our common ship of state negotiated its way through. You in the majority, we in the minority, despite the demarcation line, we have pursued, persisted, and defended our respective agenda, not in the concept of administration versus opposition divide, but as the gracious majority running side by side with the collaborative minority, all for the benefit of our constituencies. After all, the House rules talks about a minority, not about an opposition. As the tradition inappropriately established that the majority that defines its legislative agenda by sheer force of its numbers without running roughshod on the views of the minority. We shall then collaborate with the initiatives of the majority for as long as they are geared towards bettering the lives of our people. We shall be the hump along the roadways when the welfare of our constituencies is threatened by organized silence. To the House majority, let me say this. On the whole, It was a productive year of argumentation, or articulation and collaboration. As the song goes, it was a very good year. It was a nice cruise. We enjoyed your company. We appreciate your graciousness and your statesmanship. Until the next port of call in July 2024, the minority will be on board the same ship of state, watching the sea lane along the way, scanning the same horizon, yet offering a different perspective from that of the majority. May the Almighty God guide us, and may He bless the leadership of this chamber. Let us face the future, never wavering, never cowering. After all, as the greatest martyr said it well, non omnis moriar. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, my esteemed colleagues.